The Phillies had the chance on Sunday to tie the game with the bases loaded. And yet, they didn't. They had one out, bases loaded, an erratic pitcher on the mound for the Mets. Nick Castellanos, one of your big money guys, one of the guys that you signed in free agency because you believed he could be a roughly 300 hitter and a guy who could drive in a run when you need it the most. His walk to strikeout ratio has been bad all year. I think it's like 18 walks to 58 strikeouts as of Sunday. But Craig pulls the tweet. Castellanos had such horrific situational awareness on Sunday. The pitcher was erratic, had hit Real Muto, walked in a run. Your responsibility as a hitter, especially a hitter who's had the kind of struggles that Nick Castellanos has had at the plate this year, your responsibility isn't to go up and swing at the first pitch because that's what you do. And I know that there were people who immediately replied to that tweet and said, well, the pitch was down the middle, Russ. It was like an 85-mile-an-hour fastball right down the middle. What did you think he was going to do? Well, I expected him to swing because that's what he does, because he has the intelligence, it would appear, from the outside without ever having a conversation with the man. He doesn't exactly come off like a scholar. He might be a very smart man. I don't think he is. He might be a very smart guy. But there has been nothing to this point to indicate that he understood what was happening in the situation. Like, he even said post-game something to the effect of, I probably should have just kicked the ball and taken the out, which I don't even know. Like, why is that even the conversation? So anyway, he goes up and he swings at the first pitch. And again, people are like, oh, it was fastball down the middle. That's a hit. That's a pitch to hit. And if he drives that ball the opposite way, it's game over. If he crushes that ball, if he makes solid contact, that goes out. That's a salami. And I said, well, did he? Did I miss Nick Castellanos hitting the ball to a gap? Did I miss Nick Castellanos elevating the ball into the outfield for a sac fly? No, I didn't. And so then you come back to, what is it exactly that Nick Castellanos could have done? What are some of the other potential outcomes that could have come out of that at-bat? Let's talk about it. Everybody, Craig right now, you can't see it. Craig is currently wearing the Doctor Strange robe. You know, like at the end of Endgame or whatever it was, where like he goes through and he's trying to figure out the millions of different timelines and how many can they win. Craig's doing that right now. So Craig's got to pass me that information. All right, let's play the scenario out. Nick Castellanos is up to bat. One out, bases loaded, bottom of the inning, chance to either tie the game in a few different ways or win the game. Okay. Take the first pitch. Yes, it's a good pitch. And for a good hitter or a hitter who has been performing well this year, an Alec Bohm, a guy who has MVP experience, like MVPs in the trophy case, a Bryce Harper, who you're paying big bucks to go out and do, fine. A guy who typically hits for average, who also isn't healthy right now, but if he had been, like a Trey Turner. I don't want to see Nick Castellanos swinging at the first pitch because he hasn't earned the ability to swing at the first pitch this season. You can make a case he hasn't earned it in his entire Phillies tenure, but let's just play with this one brief point of time. He's not getting it done this season. Yes, he had some big hits last week, and you could say, hey, in terms of recent games, sure, he's seeing the ball a little bit better. That doesn't negate everything else from the first few months of the season. He's hitting like, what, 215? No, he doesn't get to swing at the first pitch. I don't give a shit how much money you paid him. He doesn't get to swing at the first pitch. That's a conversation between the manager and the player. So let's play this out. What could Nick Castellanos have done? He could have taken the first pitch. All right, it would have been a strike. And there was some jackass who said in the replies to that tweet,
still would have been 0-1 either way, Russ.
Yes, it would have been. But you know what it would have shown the pitcher? It would have shown perhaps Nick Castellanos, who is very well known for being a guy who goes up and swings at literally anything around the plate and sometimes off it, that, oh, he might be a little bit more patient in this at-bat. And perhaps it applies just a little bit more pressure to the pitcher, maybe just a little bit. Things that could have happened. Could have been hit by a pitch. Real Muto was. Could have been walked. Harper was. He could have worked a longer at-bat. He could have potentially put himself in position to hit a sac fly. A groundout sucks, but perhaps there's a way to do it that there isn't going to be a double play where he doesn't explode his bat and the ball moves 2 inches, right? You have the possibility that this pitcher who's erratic on the mound, perhaps there's a wild pitch. Perhaps there's a passed ball. There are so many other things that could have happened. And all Castellanos has to do is take the first pitch, flip the pressure onto the pitcher. All right, fine. You would make a case that, like, in a big moment with a legit hitter at the plate, that perhaps it puts more pressure on the hitter if he's behind in the count 0-1. Whatever. Take the pitch. See a pitch or two. And if you go back and you look at the first 3 pitches in that at-bat, it was down the middle for pitch 1. I think pitch 2 and outside pitch 3 was up around the letters. None of them were particularly good pitches hit except the first one. But you would have had a 2-1 count. Just take the pitches. 2-1 count. All of a sudden, flips in your favor, Nick Castellanos. Perhaps you can walk. Maybe you do get a meatball that you get to hit. Maybe with a 2-1 count, you get to hone in, look for the meatball, and swing at that. Instead, you have now given the pitcher the idea that, all right, this guy's going to swing at anything. Then he does, and he fouls 2 pitches off. And guess what happens, folks? He has no leverage in that situation. It's all over. And then you see him go up, and they said at one point that he shortened up his swing. He was in a defensive swing, and it took him out of it. It took any leverage that he had in that at-bat out. And as a guy who's getting paid the kind of money that he is, a guy who has 1 out, bases loaded, you have to put more pressure on the pitcher. And he didn't. And so, like, look, we can all have these moments where we say, hey, it's just one game. It's one of 162, and typically I'm there. But when it's one of your big money guys and a guy who genuinely needs to perform, a guy who really needs to have something good happen for him and for this team, he didn't get the job done. That doesn't make me an asshole for pointing it out. It just makes me a person who says, hey, there are a lot better outcomes that could have come from it if he just takes a pitch. And listen, if he takes 0-1 and then pitcher throws it down the middle and you're 0-2, then I look like a jackass? Maybe, perhaps. But he always seems to find himself choosing the worst outcome. He often finds himself doing the thing that we all know is going to fail. Like, if you could have live bet on it at the time, and maybe some of you did, could you have live bet on Nick Castellanos to ground into a double play? I bet you at least 40% of the people watching that game in the Delaware Valley would have happily taken that bet. There was almost no chance a positive outcome was going to come out of it, especially when you saw him swing at the first pitch and then at the second and the third. We all knew where it was going. Now, I've seen people compare him to Tobias Harris, and I think somebody did in the chat a little bit ago. And Craig, if you can find it, by all means, pull it up. But Castellanos and Tobias Harris are not the same, okay? They both apparently are well enough liked guys. So they do have that in common. They both were paid a boatload of money and probably more than they should have. All right, they have that in common. They both can perform where there's really no pressure. All right, they do have that in common. They don't perform particularly well in moments where you need them to. Oh, shit, they are the same person, aren't they? I think Tobias Harris actually has better basketball IQ than Nick Castellanos has baseball IQ. I'll go that far. That's where they're not the same. I do think that despite the fact that Tobias Harris was an overpaid player who underperformed in a whole lot of ways, I do think his basketball IQ is higher. So he gets that. I don't know what exactly is it that you've gotten out of Nick Castellanos as a Philly right now that makes you say, like, hey, I'm all in on the guy. Let him swing first pitch. What is it? He's handsome. He has a son that people like to, cheer for and that's like actively engaged, and people like to see the father-son dynamic. Is that what we're seeing? Is that what it is? Cats in the cradle? Is that what this is? Like, do we have people that are just getting themselves emotionally worked up? Some people didn't have a parent who told them they're proud of them, and so they see that and they go, yes, that's why I support Nick Castellanos, because he seems to be a good dad. Is it people who say, handsome fella? Support the handsome fella. Maybe. Perhaps. But from a baseball perspective, has there been much of anything that you can hang your hat on and say, yes, Nick Castellanos by all means. Swing at the first pitch, buddy. Green light. Bases loaded. Get the fuck out. Like, stop. Stop. It's ridiculous. Now, I'd say all that, and I've now worked myself up a little bit, but like I said, Sunday's game happened. I went, that sucks. And I walked away from it, and I was fine. But for the purposes of today's show, I meant to have this conversation with all of you yesterday, but I'll have this right now. I think that Nick Castellanos is still somewhere in there, somewhere in the cranium. There's a good baseball player. I don't think we're ever going to see that very good baseball player in this city. I just don't think it's going to work. I would love to be wrong. I don't care about the regular season. Listen, if you get to a point where this team continues on this historic pace for their franchise, and you get to October, and Nick Castellanos puts the team on his back for a series, or gets 3 clutch hits in the postseason that ultimately lead to the Phillies making the World Series, if not winning it, then by all means, we can have that conversation about how, hey, bad regular season, came up clutch, goes down as a legend, everything's forgotten. But what's more likely to happen is he's going to continue to be sort of like a middling hitter who you're going to look back on some of the Cincinnati years and go, where the hell's that guy at? And then when they get to the postseason, as one of the only really reliable right-handed bats, you're going to look at it and say, I wish that we would have had a guy who can hit closer to 300. I don't think anybody at this point even looks at Nick Castellanos and says, hey, we want the guy to hit 20, 25, 30 home runs. I think people just want to see a guy who goes up and consistently puts the ball in play, hits the gaps, in situations like that is able, given his ability to make contact with the ball, could perhaps get you a sac fly and get the game extended to another inning, at which point you hope that your talent and the fact that the Mets are going to get in their own heads about, here it's happening again, that it's going to flip the pressure onto them. But for whatever reason, it didn't happen. It is what it is. I'm allowed to be disappointed. All of you who saw that game, you're also absolutely well within your right to feel a little bit upset and bummed and bothered by the fact that the game ended like